Well, hello, avid readers of Christian fiction. You are going to be so excited to hear about this book because it is truly unlike anything I've read, and I don't say that lightly. But I am so wrapped up in the middle of this book right now. I got to figure out what's happening. But before we get there, let me introduce you to my guest. So, Stephen Burnett is the guest here. We're talking about his book, Above the Circle of Earth, which is a sci-fi, but it's a different. I'm gonna let you explain it, Stephen. So first of all, welcome and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Trisha, it's great to be on board. We had you on the Lorehaven Fantastical Truth podcast last summer, along with your son, for
Yes.
your book. So it's great to visit your starship for a change. Yes, Stephen Burnett here, Above the Circle of Earth author. It's my debut science fiction novel for grown-up readers and older students. Although I'd be interested to see
Yeah.
what you, as a homeschool conference pro and publishing pro, would have to say about that. I'm also the publisher of lorehaven.com, which is a mission to explore fantastical stories for God's glory with our own podcast, articles, reviews of the best Christian made fantastical novels that we've found. So lots of people creating these stories, like you all with the avid readers. We want to raise up a discerning and enjoying audience of thoughtful Christian fans who are going to drive more and better stories like these in the future.
Yeah. Okay. So it's sci-fi, which is, I mean, it starts in Mars. So and it starts in the middle of this very dangerous situation. But I will say, and this is in a good way, like so much like scripture and like personal application and like looking at your life. And I was impressed because I don't know, you're just like tackling subjects. They're like, whoa, this is really good. Okay, I really like how that was. Okay, this is a dilemma. Oh, what's going on? My mind was constantly like in a very, very good way, like, oh, I see that scripture application. Okay, where we're going with this? So, how in the world did you pull this off? That's what I want to know because your heart for evangelism, for reaching the world and worlds beyond, which we'll talk about in a second, was so real, but it does not come across as like preachy and overbearing. It was super interesting, very well done. And I do think that older high school students that like sci-fi will really like this book. And I don't even know if that was a question, but how did you pull this off? And tell us a little bit about the book. Why don't we go there?
So yeah, it starts with the story. There's all kinds of big ideas in there, and what I affectionately call theobabble, as opposed to what some sci-fi writers will say about Star Trek, or sci-fi fans will say about Star Trek. You know, they have some technobabble. Well, Above the Circle of Earth has theobabble, but it drives the story, and the story is
Mm-hmm.
extremely human-centered. When people think of science fiction, if you're an evangelical Christian, you may think about end times fiction. Or maybe if you're really open-minded, you think about dystopian fiction, and then you think about YA. Well, you said at the top, like, this is very different from that. For one thing, we're not quite in a dystopia. It's more
Yes.
pre-dystopian if you're a Christian in this world, which is our planet Earth 100 years from this year, the year 2125, an era of balkanization, with the secular government, the cause, a partnership of member nations, driving the exploration of space and these incredible technological accomplishments, not just rockets being caught by robotic arms, but synthetic gravity and settlements on other planets, like this world that so many people have been yearning for a long time and may actually make parts of it come true in our lifetime, we see now. What then happens in this future with Christians and other believers? Now, if you're in the Star Trek future, those other religions just kind of, fade away politely,
Mm-hmm.
leaving the humanistic default. And then maybe if you're on Bajor, you get the Bajoran religion, and there's some interesting things to explore there. But in this world, there's no aliens. It's just our solar system. And Brock Rivers, who grew up in a Christian preserve, which is a legal district where you can practice your faith openly and confidently and raise your family and stay secure. But outside in the secular world, apart from some trading here and there, that is a no-go zone, especially if you want to live out your public Christian faith. Brock does the opposite, because when you're young and foolish and kind of resisting against the system, you decide that you know better. Well, he and his wife and their young child end up being exiled to the planet Mars, where they can just try to lay low, and he tries to eke out an existence on this desert world. Then, at their lowest point, they're summoned back to Earth for the resistance effort against the humanistic cause, which just happens to be the space mission, a restoration of biblical missions work, not on Earth, where it's barely allowed, but in outer space where things are a little bit more wild. So this is the origin story of the space mission for Brock and Alicia and their misfit missionary friends as they try to put together, find a spaceship, and deal with a lot of opposition, not just from the humanistic cause regime, but some of it from their own people, and including some rather frightening threats lurking in the shadows of their own preserve.
Yeah, and so we talk about, like, go into all the world. He has a very missionary heart, but, like, go into all the worlds, like, go into like, they cannot go out and preach beyond their reserves, but there's, like, other planets and other places that have humans, so, like, they need to know the gospel of Christ. And so I have a missionary daughter. She's in the Czech Republic. She's been there 10 years. I have 2 daughters that just went to Poland in October. They're going for a year. We don't know what. So we have very much a mission heart. My favorite thing to do with homeschoolers is homeschooling my kids is to read the YWAM Youth with the Mission missionary stories. We just have one going all the time. So we love this. And I'm like, this is sci-fi. Like he's doing this in sci-fi. And, we also my husband's a Trekkie. My 22-year-old daughter's favorite, like, Star Trek, Captain Kirk, any time for Christmas or birthdays, if I could find anything Captain Kirk, like, it's her favorite thing ever. So we're this world is very important to us, the Trekkie world, but then evangelism and missionary stuff is very important to us, and I'm like, "He put it all in one book." And this is really amazing. Okay, so talk about though, I mean, reading the reviews, people are like, "It's a little bit like this, and it's a little bit about that." So talk about your influences and what was important to you when you sat down to write this book.
So the oldest version of this book, believe it or not, dates back to before, and I'm revealing almost my age here, and I'm not kidding, September 11th. Was literally
Really?
writing about even religions like Islam and like some of the differences between that and Christianity, even before the terror attacks of September 11th, 2001. So that's how far back we go here. And
Mhm.
even before I had watched any Star Trek episodes, because like Trisha, we love homeschoolers. I was a homeschool student. You're a homeschool mom. I was part of a large homeschool family. Well, homeschoolers have the little quirks, and mine was deciding in 1999, hey, I know there's this thing called sci-fi. Like, there should be some sci-fi except for Christians. And so it's a really original thought, but hopefully it led in some better directions here. So it started with that cheesy origin story there with a sci-fi character on a pizza box. It was Qui-Gon Jinn, by the way. So the other Star universe. It was prequel time back in those days, but that led me on a journey to discover, well, what is science fiction? What are the notable works? Like, what are the worldview influences in there? And unlike fantasy, at least as we know it now, which had a strong infusion of biblical worldview thanks to the
Mhm, mhm.
Inklings, sci-fi had a lot more humanistic influence in those stories. If you go back to Jules Verne, like kind of this more gentleman who's giving divine providence a polite nod here and there and still preserving some Christian morality. But then you get H.G. Wells, who's much more humanist, and providence is more lurking in the background if God is there at all. And then if you travel into the future, well, there's no sign of Jesus returning. Everything just goes to a complete, post apocalyptic wasteland. And then these other stories that you read, like there's some adventure serials and all of that, but also just a lot of humanism. And even going back to the days of good old Captain Kirk, the censors would occasionally make him say, that they believe in the true God or something, as opposed to a giant Apollo doing magic tricks. And then Captain Kirk says, "We have no need for gods. We find the one quite adequate." And you just kind of see where someone scribbled that into the script because Gene
Yeah.
Roddenberry's kind of an atheistic fellow, but they got to work with the system back then because it was a more positive world. And then later on in Star Trek Five: Final Frontier, they're kind of lambasting the whole idea of trying to find God at the center of the galaxy. And there's some more humanistic assumptions repeated in the Next Generation, but then actually challenged and often subverted in Deep Space Nine. So there's all kinds of different influences that have gone into this story, but I think the main one is simply meeting people like the pastors and missionaries that you've mentioned, and then trying to come to grips with that core conflict. There is, how can you follow Christ's call to go therefore and disciple the nations? So, not just summoning them to a conversion, but discipling them. How
Yeah.
does that then work with the similar call to protect your people, to protect your
Mm.
kids, to stay secure, and to not let that world get to you? And I thought, well, we could write a nonfiction book about that, or we could do something that's a lot closer to my heart, which is science fiction, which is fantastical stories.
Yeah, and so one thing that I loved, because I think growing up, my mom and my grandma became Christians when I was, like, 2nd and 3rd grade, and then you hear science stuff at school, and it's like you're hearing Bible stuff, and we have a hard time meshing it, which now, there's so many amazing science, um, stuff that points to God, but, when I was growing up, it was like it wasn't there, and even in your book, you talk about, like, well, God made science, like, God made the universe, He made the stars, and it doesn't have to be like we're only science brain or only faith brain. It's a meshing of the two in really fun and interesting ways. And yeah, there's well, like you said, some of these things we might see them in our lifetime, but there's these sciency type of what was that quantum where they moved from
Oh, the
place to place?
quantum vaulting, yeah, one of
The
the more
quantum vaulting.
speculative
Yes.
devices
Yeah.
of the
I'm
thing,
like,
yes.
"That's so cool." Like, that's so cool. There's that fun stuff in there, but then there is this underlying, "What's going on? Who's trying to take us out? Uh, we do need to go into space." Like, there's a multi-level of different elements going on, which I think is really cool. We have the sciencey stuff, but we have the, like, mystery of what's happening, and then we have the evangelism and the faith stuff, but also he's a dad with kids, and they're, like, worried about diapers. So
The
let's
first
talk
homeschool
about
family
that.
on Mars, that's
I
right.
know.
Could be the first
Exactly.
Christians on Mars too.
Yeah, it was like, "Oh, like, he doesn't have enough money for diapers, like, we gotta figure out how to have to go do a job. I didn't get diapers." And I'm like, "Okay, that makes him just even, like, more real as a parent." I have 10 kids, but it's like, "Oh, wait, this is, like, a guy that's really worried about his family too." Like, it's not a lot of books, and I will even say this for my books, like, there's not very many kids involved because that's complicated. But you, like, went there with all the complications and made that part of the story. So talk about that. Like, why did you make him a family man with his wife, with these kids, as this main character in the story?
Growing up, that was my normal,
Mhm.
being surrounded by kids, younger siblings, and rightly, I think in my case, presuming that my future would be, getting married. I mean, I've known Brock and Alicia Rivers longer, literally longer than I've been married, and I've known all their other missionary misfit friends as well. Some have had some names changed here and there, but that to me is simply part and parcel to that command
Mhm.
of God in Genesis 1, which is creating the origin of science and exploration and families at the same time, where he says to Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the birds of the air and the fish of the sea at all. That is normal before sin gets involved, right?
Yeah.
Not everyone can have a family, and I don't even have kids of my own myself for reasons known only to God. But I still have such a heart for that as God's primary method, I would say, of the Great Commission. I mean, it starts at home. There are some who, obviously, like the Apostle Paul said, are called to be single and go to other nations or other cities, and that gives them a little freedom to do that, right? But I think the Great Commission starts at home. It starts with your
Yes.
local church. It starts with training up your kids and teaching at church and listening and fellowshipping and all that good stuff, which gets it's kind of easier in a future world where all the cultural Christianity is all but stripped out. But also gets a lot more challenging because then you're
Mhm.
not being challenged by the world. And Christians now, we live in the world, but obviously we have a way of setting up our own little preserves here and there, often for very good reasons, but often in ways that prevent us from being sharpened by the worldviews around us.
Yeah. So good. Okay. So let's talk about, like, the messages that you wanted to get across, because I know there's, like, very strong spiritual themes of suffering and doubt and sacrifice. What do you hope that sci-fi fans walk away with when going through this book?
First, you ought to have just an amazing journey. Fiction is first and
Mhm.
foremost recreation.
Yes.
It's not just about that Monday through Saturday work week, right? It's a Sabbath rest. I think that's a big purpose of why God gave us imaginations to celebrate Him on in those off hours. So hopefully they'll find a well written adventure tale where the tension is building and kind of where the bad guys are, but then there's some
But
other
there's
bad guys
surprises because
coming
some
around.
things happen and you're
Lots
like,
of
"What?
surprises.
What?
Absolutely.
What?" I'm like I'm in my car listening to the audiobook like, "What?" I'm, like, talking to myself,
Oh, you
"What?
got the audio version then,
What
yeah.
Yes, I
Stephen
got the
McKean
audio
did,
version.
great with that, yeah. He
Really
does an
good,
especially
really
great
good.
villain voice later, just you wait.
Oh my gosh, and I would literally be talking, driving like, "What? What just happened? I can't believe he just did that." So, I will say, like, you're right. I mean, we talk about spiritual themes, and I do wanna talk about that, but it's not like like there's action, there's all kinds of stuff happening. So I go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, first and foremost, yeah, it needs to be enjoyable. It needs to be a fun ride, and then hopefully, even if folks are a little less familiar with science fiction, this is a story that you can get into. Like maybe you're
Mhm.
expecting YA dystopian or end times. Like this is something a little different. It's a little closer to
Mhm.
that Star Trek end of things, where it's not dystopian, but it's kind of maybe pre-dystopian if you come from a
Mhm.
particular
Mhm.
perspective, or it's pre-utopian if you come from another perspective. That's the challenge: is that there are not easy answers. Another thing to expect is taking some of those ideas like God made science, or even we're supposed to go therefore and evangelize. Like that is not the argument of the story. That is a presupposition.
Yeah.
That is absolutely a foundational idea. Okay, but now what? Like we've already answered those questions. I don't need to argue with the reader. The reader needs to at least imagine that this is a truism. Now, how does that work in a world like this? And sometimes there are answers, but you have to fight real hard to get to them. And then sometimes there are no easy answers. And I think that's the wonderful thing about the best Christian made fiction is you can accept some biblical truths as foundational and don't have to argue for them, but that only leads to more questions that need to be answered. And so that to me reconciles that idea of the fact that God's word is true, that biblical doctrine is true, but that actually raises more questions. And then only Christ in eternity can answer those questions. And if you answered all of them, well, you wouldn't have a story then. You wouldn't have those questions being played out in a simulated imaginary world. So that's what I want readers to get, is just an adventure
Yeah.
tale that is kind of hard science fiction where all the calendar dates line up and the planets are the right distances from each other and all of that. But more of that hard stuff is kind of running down there on command deck of the spaceship. You can stay up on living deck and just enjoy the ride, or you can go up to the top level, the command deck, and debate some of the big issues and plot difficulties that arise thanks to the adventure.
Yeah, I love that. Okay. So you talked about you've had this idea for a long time. Tell us a little bit about the journey of the book. You have, I mean, there's so many cool things that happen with the plot and the characters and stuff, but this book has had its own journey, it sounds like.
It has, and it started off as creation scientists in space, which also
Mhm.
sounds very cool. And I'd imagine that at least some of the crew members are, creation science type guys. But A, that narrows the audience even more.
Mhm.
And B, you'd have to do a lot of research into creation science. And C, I realized as I kept growing up and revising the pitch and doing all of that sort of thing creatively, that this isn't a story so much about apologetics as it
Mm.
is engagement with the world, which is a very
Mhm.
human issue. This is not so much a thinky thing, but a human thing. And so I really wanted to lean into that and really wanted to test that idea of going therefore when it's not just the Earth, the planet Earth that's locking you out, but now you need to go to other worlds. So that's really where it went in that direction. And then a few years ago, I took another look at it and I thought, well, there may actually be something here. You know how it is where you write a story,
Yeah.
you put it on the shelf for a while, and like, well, maybe there'll be something I can make of that someday, maybe not. But in this case, I realized, okay, there may actually be something here. There may be some changes now that we see in our world, technologically and culturally, that lend to a revisit. So several years ago, I started revisiting, and I started to like the story a little more. And even though
That's so
I'd been
cool.
to some other worlds here and there creatively in the in between time, so I can't say that, oh, I've worked on this novel 25 years. I have to say 25 years off and on.
Yeah.
That qualifier makes a big difference because no, it does not take me 25 years to write a novel. I just want anybody who wants to buy a future project for me to know that. Like I could probably turn it around, first draft around in 8 months, maybe six. It's not quite the Trisha Goyer pace, but I'm getting there. I'll get there eventually. I think that sums it up basically. In addition to just the challenge of trying to present this kind of story in a world of Christian readers who love them some fantasy and love them some YA. And I go, well, here's a science fiction for grown-up readers. Where do I sign? Uh, you
Yeah.
got to hopefully make sure it's a really good one and something unique that's going to grab you and be a little different, but also kind of a variation on some genre tropes that folks know well.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, let's talk about the cause dominated Earth. And cause is it stands for something, but it's cause. I
Yeah,
don't
it's
know
the
what it says.
Coalition for Advancement of United Space Exploration.
There we go. Because as I'm listening, it's like I could almost see this, like, right? I could almost see this happening. So talk a little bit about that, and then we have Brock on Mars, just to give us a setting for the science fictiony setting for this book.
Well, if you dive deep into the lore or shallow into the lore, there was a war, a world war, in I think in my timeline in about the middle to late 21st century. So you and I could live to see it if I turn out to be a prophet. They end up calling it the last war, very optimistically, because that would be hopefully the last global conflict we have. And from the ashes of the smaller conflicts that gave birth to this, there arose the neutralist movement, which gave birth to the cause eventually. And cause is the humanistic regime. It's not like
Mhm.
the United Nations, it's not like the Antichrist. It's just a coalition of member nations that want to further the advancement of the human image through space exploration and technological development. So there's a lot of humanist philosophy in there, a lot of emphasis on becoming like the best, most physically peak humans, the smartest humans that have ever lived. Like, so it's almost a little bit like the NICE from Lewis's That Hideous Strength. And I mean, that's a rather old science fiction idea that you could get this Superman simply by
Mhm.
training yourself with the best ideas and the best institutions. So Cause has taken over and has done some legitimately amazing things. There's settlements on Mars, nearly 1 million people now living on Mars by the year 2125. Lunar mining going on. I think it's helium 3 they're mining on the moon. And then stretching outward even to the asteroid belt and the Jovian and Saturnine systems. And that will just keep on going. First the solar system, then the rest of the galaxy, right? And, the spaceships can only, I mean, there's no faster than light travel. So you circumvent a few difficulties there. But there are, as you said, quantum vaults. And that plus other technological developments really opened things up when you can just jump from planet to planet in these chambers, although it is prohibitively expensive for most folks. But it really is the worldview that's the problem. Like the story opens with Brock confronting a very real and terrible example of how Cause
Mhm.
treats the underlings in the Martian dome. And they have themselves a little liturgy for people who may not be able to make it out of a disaster. And you see kind of this backwards inverted compassion there, but
Mhm.
it's based on this reductio ad absurdum of humanism 100 years from now. And we're starting to see this is the scary part because I was working on this in earnest, like even about 10 years ago. We're starting to see more of this kind of this conservative feeling version of humanism that borrows a lot from Judeo Christian virtues, but has no gospel in it.
Right.
And they make truly great things. Truly, like even the artificial intelligence and the robots and the self-driving cars and the stuff that we are seeing, like science fiction is taking over reality now. Well, it
It's
already
true.
has taken over for a while. But in terms of the worldview, like the worldview of some of these guys has literally been inspired by some of the humanistic science fiction, like the Foundation series and even Star Trek. So it's interesting to see this kind of come full circle, but then also to say, well, if that's going to be our future, if that's the big what do the Christians do? What do you even
Mhm.
do if you're a
Mhm.
member of another religion in this future? How's that going to work out for you? Especially when people decide, you know what, we're a little tired of being fat and happy in our religious preserves. I think we'd like to buy a spaceship and go out there and get to know our neighbors and introduce them to Jesus. And that starts the conflict. And this story, really, Above the Circle of Earth, is the origin story of the space mission.
Okay, origin story. So is there more books?
That
Yes,
is
yeah.
TBD. I think a
Ah,
few
okay.
Hollywood moguls, a few Hollywood moguls would shake their hands and say, "No, no, no! Don't threaten people with the cinematic universe until they actually want it." So that's the philosophy here. We'll see how the space mission goes. We'll see if the recruits who enjoy this book will demand more. If that happens, who knows? But at least for the present, this is a standalone Above the Circle of Earth.
Okay, recruits, get out there and buy this book if you like sci-fi. We're just gonna say it right now. If you like sci-fi, if you think, I mean, like this is my kids' read. This is like my adult kids. My like this is it. This is so growing. So go get Above the Circle of the Earth. I'll even say the audiobook is excellent. So then Stephen can write more about this. Now, Stephen, thank you so much for being here. Where can listeners go to find out more about you? I know you said it a little bit at the beginning, but remind us again, you and everything that you're doing.
Well, of course, I'm the publisher of lorehaven.com. So that's a really quick and easy way to get to me there. You can find my own site, stephenburnett.com, there as well. We do run the Fantastical Truth podcast every Tuesday, introducing you to more stories beyond the science fiction, all this good stuff by Christian authors, and reviews and articles and more like that. But for my personal platform, yeah, you can get to that through Lorehaven, or go to stephenburnett.com, or just look for my name on all the social platforms, including Instagram and X.
Yep, and we will have all the links in the show notes. But Stephen, thank you so much for being here today.
Tricia, thank you so much for what you do, and thanks for inviting me on board.